The pulse oximeter read 84, then 83. Daniel Marsh heard it before he saw it, the thin, reedy wheeze coming from the living room floor. The kind of sound that bypassed every rational thought in his brain and went straight to the animal part. The part that only understood time's wrong. Wrong? Wrong asterisk. He came around the corner at a dead sprint, socked feet sliding on hardwood. Noah lay on his side near the radiator. Knees pulled up, one hand pressed to his sternum as if he could manually squeeze air into his own lungs. His lips had gone pale at the corners. 7 years old, and already his body knew how to curl inward like a leaf in frost. Noah. Daniel dropped to his knees. "Hey, look at me." His son's eyes found him. They were wide and absolutely clear, not panicked, not glassy, just focused with that terrible, exhausted concentration of a child who had been through this enough times to know the drill. Asterisk, wait for Dad. Don't move. Wait. Asterisk. Elena! Daniel's voice cracked the silence. She was already moving. He heard the wheels before he saw her, the old manual chair that she'd borrowed from the basement storage when the back stairs got icy, the one he'd offered to replace 3 times and she'd declined 3 times. It rounded the hallway corner fast, and Elena reached them in 4 hard pushes. She had the spacer out before she stopped rolling. Inhaler. Her voice was flat and precise. Not cold, there was no coldness in it. Just the specific clarity of someone filtering out everything that wasn't the next necessary step. Daniel already had the blue albuterol off the side table. He passed it to her. She snapped it into the spacer chamber in one motion, shook it twice, and crouched forward from the chair. Noah. She pressed 2 fingers under his jaw, angling his chin up gently. "I need your mouth." He opened it. Big breath out first. Everything out. He exhaled a thin, papery sound. "Good. Now hold." She placed the mask. "Breathe in slow. 1 second. 2. The pulse oximeter beeped. Daniel watched her hands. They didn't shake. She counted under her breath times 1, 2, 3, 4 times, then had Noah exhale again. Second puff. Third. She checked the display on the oximeter with the quick, sideways glance of someone who already knew what she'd find and was simply confirming it. Ba. Noah's shoulders dropped half an inch. The wheeze softened. Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That was when he noticed her dress. The hem, dark navy wool, the kind she always wore, always long, always draped to the ankle, had caught in the spokes of the rear wheel during her rush down the hallway. The fabric pulled taut from her hip downward, pinned flat against the tire. She hadn't stopped, hadn't slowed, had simply arrived at his son, with the wheel locked at a strange angle because the dress was holding it. She was halfway off the chair now, leaning over Noah, and the dress had no more give. Daniel reached automatically. Her hand found his wrist before his fingers touched the fabric. The grip was light but exact. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Noah. "Please." Her voice dropped. A different register entirely. "Don't lift my dress." The pulse oximeter read 93 now. Noah was breathing. The emergency was receding. Daniel looked at her face. She still hadn't looked at him. He reached anyway, not to see, just to free the fabric from the wheel. Because she needed to be able to move, and in pulling the wool loose from the spoke, he felt it. The solid, unyielding resistance of something beneath that was not flesh, not bone, something else entirely. The dress fell free. Elena resettled in the chair without comment, running her palm once across Noah's back in slow circles. Under the lamplight, with snow pressing white against every window, Daniel looked down. The hem had shifted just enough. Titanium, carbon fiber. The unmistakable geometry of a prosthetic lower leg, articulated at the ankle, attached above where a knee should have been. He went still, not with disgust, not with pity, with the particular, helpless freeze of a man who understood, suddenly, that he had been sharing his home with someone carrying a weight he had never once thought to ask about. Elena looked up then. Their eyes met. Noah reached up and grabbed her sleeve. "I'm okay," he rasped. "I know," she said. She didn't look away from Daniel. "I know you are." The first snow of the season came on a Tuesday in early November, and with it came Elena Voss. Daniel had been standing at the kitchen window with his third coffee of the morning, watching the flakes spiral past the spruce tree he kept meaning to trim, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once, the way grief operates when it stops being acute and becomes simply atmospheric, a permanent change in barometric pressure. Margaret had been gone 26 months. He still bought her brand of hand soap by accident. He heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive and looked up. A gray Civic with one slightly dented rear quarter panel. A woman got out. She was wearing a navy wool dress that stopped at her ankles, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, and a coat that was not warm enough for what the thermometer said. She moved across the ice-slicked path with careful, deliberate steps, not the tentative shuffle of someone afraid to fall, more like someone making conscious, considered contact with each surface before committing weight to it. She knocked. He had been dreading this interview. The previous 3 people he'd spoken to from the agency had been fine, competent, nothing wrong with them except that each one had arrived looking at the house and the child and the situation and visibly calculating whether this was the kind of arrangement they wanted. One had asked about Margaret in a way that felt clinical. One had talked too much. The third had looked at Noah's nebulizer setup with a faint expression of alarm that she'd quickly covered, but not quickly enough. Daniel had grown good at reading alarm. He opened the door and Elena looked at him with the directness of a person who has spent considerable time deciding whether or not to be somewhere, and has come to a final answer. "Mr. Marsh, I'm Elena Voss, from the Clearwater Domestic Agency." Her resume was 3 pages. Certified in pediatric first aid. Previous experience with a child with a seizure disorder, then a family with twins under 2. References that checked out, he'd called them all, feeling faintly invasive, and every person he spoke with had paused before answering. The kind of pause that meant they were choosing the right word. Asterisk. Reliable. Asterisk. Asterisk. Discreet. Asterisk. Asterisk. Competent. Asterisk. One woman had simply said she was the best thing that happened to our family that year. He showed her Noah's room. She asked to see the nebulizer setup. She asked about trigger patterns, cold air, dust, animal dander, stress, and wrote nothing down, just listened with the focused stillness of someone organizing information into a structure that would stay. She observed the living room layout, the position of the radiator, the distance from the kitchen to the hall, the storage of medications on the side table. Not invasively, more like an architect reading a floor plan. Daniel thought, asterisk, she is calculating something. Asterisk. Later, he would understand what. She accepted the position. She would start the following Monday. She would need Sundays off, and one weekday afternoon that might shift week to week, and she would not discuss the reasons. Daniel said that was fine. She left in the gray Civic, moving slowly over the fresh snow, and Daniel watched the car disappear around the curve of the road before he finished his coffee. 10 days into the arrangement, Noah got sick. It happened between 6 and 7 a.m. on a Thursday, during the window when Daniel was in the shower and Elena was making breakfast. The temperature had dropped overnight to 11 degrees, the kind of cold that crept under doors and sat in corners, and Noah had gotten up early and sat too close to the drafty window reading, which was exactly the kind of low-grade ambient trigger that his pulmonologist kept warning them about. Daniel came downstairs to find Elena already beside Noah on the couch. Spacer in hand, the oximeter clipped to his finger. He stopped in the doorway. She was counting breaths. Not estimating counting, with one eye on the device and one hand resting on Noah's sternum to feel the intercostal pull. 89, she said. Not to Daniel. To herself or to the data. Is he? He will be. She didn't look up. Come sit with him. I need you in his eye line. Daniel crossed the room and sat on the floor in front of the couch. At Noah's level, the way she seemed to understand, without explaining that a child in respiratory distress benefits from a familiar face at eye level rather than hovering overhead. He'd read this in a pamphlet once and forgotten it. She just did it. Third puff of albuterol. Fourth. She angled Noah's torso upright, one hand between his shoulder blades, the other maintaining light pressure on his sternum. 94. 96. Noah's wheeze softened into a long, shuddering exhale. Good, she said, very quietly. You did the hard part. Daniel watched her hands. The efficiency was not learned from a manual. It was the kind of efficiency that comes from watching someone struggle to breathe often enough that the protocol becomes instinct, becomes reflex, becomes something that bypasses thought entirely and goes directly to action. He asked her about it that evening, when Noah was asleep and the house had gone quiet. She was washing dishes at the sink, her back to him, her dress hanging straight. You've done that before, he said. Not accusatory. Careful. A pause in the dishwashing. Yes, she said. He waited. She didn't say anything else. He poured himself water and went to bed. The pharmacy was 12 blocks from the house, a narrow store wedged between a dry cleaner and a hardware place that had been there since the 70s. Daniel went there for Noah's prescriptions every 2 weeks. The pharmacist knew him by name and always asked about the boy. He was there on a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd week of November, waiting for a refill, when he saw Elena at the counter. She hadn't seen him. She was speaking quietly to the pharmacist, a different one from his usual, younger, new, and sliding a small prescription across the counter. Daniel was behind a tall display of cold remedies. He wasn't hiding. He simply hadn't moved. The pharmacist typed. Elena said, Grace Miller. Daniel looked at the floor. He spent 45 seconds deciding what to do with that information. Stood there between the NyQuil and the throat lozenges and thought about Margaret, who had kept a box of her mother's letters in the attic that she never opened and never threw away and never explained, and who he had never asked about the things people carry in their own particular containers. He didn't say anything at the pharmacy. He said something 3 days later. It was snowing again. It seemed like it was always snowing that November, thick and relentless. Boulder going white by early afternoon, and he came home to find Elena at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold at her elbow, and he simply put his keys down on the counter and said, I saw you at the pharmacy. She didn't flinch. Didn't move at all, actually. You had a prescription filled under a different name, he said. She turned the cup slowly on the table. The tea made a small sound against the ceramic. It was insulin, he said. Children's dosage. Long pause. The radiator ticked. Elena looked up. My daughter's name was Lily, she said. She had type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed when she was 4. She stopped. She died when she was 6. Daniel sat down. He did not say, times, I'm sorry, times he had enough experience with grief to know that those words, however genuine, land wrong in certain moments, land like something the listener has to manage rather than something that helps. He just sat down. The insulin? He said carefully. I kept her supply. Elena's voice was even. I've moved 8 times in 3 years. I keep it with me. I don't know why I keep filling the prescription. I know I don't need to anymore. She looked at the cup. I know. You don't have to explain that to me, Daniel said. She looked at him, then really looked, with the full focus she usually reserved for pulse oximeters and medication schedules. Grace Miller is the name I use when I need to not be found, she said. Daniel absorbed this. Okay, he said, and that was all. 3 days after the night of the oximeter reading, when Noah had been sleeping well and the crisis had receded into routine, Daniel knocked on the door of the small room Elena used off the kitchen. She opened it. He had a mug of coffee and another one for her, and he held it out and she took it and stepped back to let him in, because apparently they both understood without discussing it that what needed to happen now was a conversation that required sitting down. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed. He sat in the chair by the window, with the snow still going outside, blue-gray in the early dark. "The night Noah had the attack," he said. "I saw. I know what you saw." He looked at his coffee. She looked at hers. "It wasn't a medical procedure," he said. "The scarring was the shape of it. It wasn't surgical." Elena set the mug on the side table. She reached down and pulled the hem of her dress up to the knee. Not performatively, not with difficulty, just directly, the way someone removes a bandage in front of a doctor. The prosthetic was titanium and carbon fiber, matte black, articulated at the ankle with a slight forward flex. It attached above where the knee should have been. The edges of the residual limb were uneven in a way that a planned amputation is not, smooth in some places and knotted in others. She let him look. "His name is Captain Victor Hale," she said. Or he was. He held a captaincy in the Army National Guard. He was stationed in Colorado Springs when we met. I was 24. She straightened her dress. He was charming in the way that people who are very good at control are charming. You don't see the control at first. You see the attention. Daniel didn't speak. By the time I understood what the marriage was, I had Lily, and he had my credit, my documentation, my family's address, my employment history, and 2 officers in his unit who would say whatever he told them to say. She picked up the coffee again. He didn't hit me often. He didn't need to. He had other methods, canceling my doctor appointments, going through my phone, making sure that I understood, very clearly, in very reasonable language, what would happen if I tried to leave. "Lily," Daniel said. He controlled her insulin. Elena's voice didn't change. It stayed level with the discipline of someone who has told this story before. Maybe to a lawyer, maybe to a therapist, maybe to herself, and learned how to carry it at a remove. He decided what she ate. He decided when she got her medication. He told me that if I reported him, if I called anyone, if I attempted to take her and leave, he would make sure she didn't get her evening dose. A pause, and then one night she didn't get it anyway. He said it was an accident. The medical examiner agreed with him. The snow pressed against the window. "I left 3 days after the funeral," Elena said. "I had a go-bag I'd been building for 6 months. I had a route planned. I had a contact, a woman from an organization he didn't know about." She set the mug down again. Her hands were steady. "He found me 4 days later. He had 2 people with him. There was a road." She stopped. "You don't have to," Daniel started. "The same man who killed my daughter," she said quietly, "took my leg, and he has friends in places that make reporting him something close to pointless. And so I move, and I use different names when I need to, and I work with children because she stopped, looked at him. Because I can." He had Daniel run his name that night. Not because Daniel asked, but because she understood the question he hadn't asked yet times. Is this real? Is this verifiable? Asterisk. And she respected him enough to answer it without being prompted. Victor Hale, 41 years old. Currently holding a non-deployable administrative position with a National Guard unit in Colorado Springs, 45 minutes south on I-25. 1 prior complaint from a domestic violence hotline, closed for insufficient evidence. 1 civil protection order filed and withdrawn, Elena told him, because the woman who filed it had afterward received a visit from 2 men she didn't recognize, and after that visit had decided she'd been mistaken. He had a lawyer who was very good. He had colleagues who were loyal. He had the specific, institutional protection of being a man who had never been officially found to have done anything wrong. He had a lawyer who was very good. He had colleagues who were loyal. He had the specific, institutional protection of being a man who had never been officially found to have done anything wrong. He also, Elena told Daniel, had people who watched. Daniel thought about this. He thought about it the way he thought about Noah's breathing as a fact of the landscape, a condition of the current environment that had to be accounted for even when it wasn't immediately visible. The cold existed whether or not you could see it in the air. Victor Hale existed whether or not his car was parked at the end of the street. He's been looking since I left Colorado Springs, Elena said. I was in Tucson for 2 months, then Albuquerque for 6 weeks, then outside of Santa Fe. Then I went north. She traced the edge of the table with one finger. He doesn't come himself. He sends people who look like nothing, people who park in legal spots and don't break any laws, and simply let you know, by their presence, that you've been located. And then you move. And then I move. They were in the kitchen. The lights were low. Noah was asleep upstairs with the humidifier running and the baby monitor clipped to the doorframe. He pays someone to find me. Then he sends someone else to let me know he's found me. Then I move. She spread her hands flat on the table. I've been in Boulder 3 months. The longest I've stayed anywhere in the last 2 years is 4 months. And the others, Daniel said, the families you worked for. I left before it became their problem, but you're still here. She looked at him directly. Noah got sick on my 3rd day, she said. The first time I used the spacer on him and he breathed out and his shoulders went down, he looked at me the same way Lily used to. She stopped. I should have left a month ago. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. You're not leaving, he said. Daniel, Noah's pulmonologist said this winter is going to be hard. The air quality index, the cold. He looked at his hands. I don't say that to hold you here. I say it because I want to be honest about what I need. And separately, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think you should be moving again. She said nothing for a moment. There's a sedan, she said. Dark blue. It's been parked at the corner of the block for 2 days. He stood and went to the front window. The street was empty and white. It's gone now, she said. It was there this morning. It came back on a Friday. Daniel saw it at 7 a.m. from the upstairs, landing dark blue, mid-sized, no distinguishing features, parked at the far end of the block where the streetlight was weakest. He memorized the plate. He did not go out. By the time Noah was dressed and eating breakfast, Elena had moved through the house with a systematic calm that Daniel now recognized as her particular form of controlled fear-checking window locks, noting sight lines, establishing in her mind the geometry of exits and cover. She did it quietly enough that Noah didn't notice. He was eating toast and talking about something he'd seen in a book about deep-sea fish. They have their own light, Noah said, on their heads, like a lantern. Anglerfish, Elena said, buttering the second piece of toast. They lure prey with bioluminescence. Bioluminescence? Noah repeated carefully. Close. Bioluminescence. He tried it again, got it, and looked pleased. Daniel watched them from the doorway. That afternoon, he called his brother-in-law, who was a retired Denver police detective and who owed him approximately nothing but would listen anyway. He described the situation in broad terms. Not all of it, not the road and the leg and Lily, just enough. There was a pause on the line. The husband has guard connections, his brother-in-law said, and there's an existing complaint on record. Filed and dropped. Another pause. That's a hard situation. Legally. I know. What are you planning to do? Daniel looked at the window. Down the street, the dark blue sedan had reappeared. I don't know yet, he said, but I wanted you to know the shape of it. That evening, Elena came to him. I should go, she said, before it becomes your problem. It's already my problem, Daniel said. I chose that when I didn't walk away after the pharmacy. You didn't choose. Elena. He wasn't loud. He was just clear. I'm not telling you what to do, but I want you to know that if you decide to stay, I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's happening outside. She stood in the kitchen doorway. Noah had another mild attack that evening, not severe, oximeter down to 91, before recovering with 1 round of albuterol. And Elena stayed at his side until he fell asleep at 9, her hand on his back, the humidifier running. She did not leave. It was Daniel's idea, and he was honest about where it came from. Desperation, mostly, and the conversation with his brother-in-law, who'd said times, the problem with men like this is they operate in dark corners times and then hadn't needed to finish the thought. He brought it to Elena at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, after Noah was asleep, with the dark sedan visible at the end of the street for the third consecutive evening. "They're afraid of witnesses," he said. Elena looked at him. "If what he's doing is happening in the open," Daniel said. "If there are people watching in real time." "You're talking about a live broadcast," she said. A long pause. "People like Victor don't stop when they're embarrassed," she said. "They escalate." "I know. But right now they're being patient. Patient means they're confident. Confident means they think they have time and they think no one is watching." He looked at the window. "What changes if someone's watching?" She was quiet for a long time. "He's filed no criminal charges against me," she said, finally. "Technically, he's done nothing illegal that we can prove. We have a dark sedan on a public street. We have your testimony," he said. "My testimony against a National Guard captain with institutional backing. Your testimony in front of however many people happen to be watching." She turned this over. He could see her doing it not emotionally but architecturally, the way she had evaluated the sightlines in his house on her first day. Exit points. Load-bearing elements. "I need to think," she said. She thought for 4 hours. At 2 in the morning, she knocked on his door. "All right?" she said. They set up in the kitchen the room she'd chosen, the room with the best light and the plainest background and, she noted, only one exterior window, which faced the side yard rather than the street. Daniel pulled his laptop. Elena sat across the table, her hands folded, her back straight. He started the broadcast. 11 viewers. 14. The numbers were meaningless at first. He gave a brief introduction, their names, their location, the shape of what was happening, and Elena began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes. She used full names. Victor Hale, Colorado Springs. She named the unit. She named the officer who had taken the protection order complaint and the officer she believed had discouraged the other woman from continuing hers. She described Lily her diagnosis, her management routine, the specific mechanism by which her death had been engineered and obscured. She described the road and the car and the men and what she had woken up to in a hospital 3 states away. The viewer count climbed. 40. 80. Someone typed, asterisk. Someone else. Asterisk. Are you safe right now? Asterisk. Daniel typed back, asterisk. For now, asterisk. At 400 viewers, he saw headlights at the end of the street. Not a dark blue sedan, a different car, idling. Then, a second. His stomach tightened. At 1,200 viewers, someone in the feed typed a set of official contact information, the FBI's Denver field office public tip line, and wrote, asterisk. Evidence of federal crimes. Someone with jurisdiction needs to see this now. Asterisk. At 3,000, the cars outside had not moved. At 5,000, Daniel heard Elena's voice break for the first and only time a half-breath, quickly recovered, on the word times, Lily times, and watched her put it back together with the concentrated discipline of someone who had decided that braking was not an option right now. Not in front of the people watching, not while the cars were still out there. At 8,000 viewers, the cars outside turned on. Not to leave. The headlights came on, bright and aimed directly at the house. They're trying to intimidate, Elena said, not looking away from the camera. Yeah, Daniel said. Keep going, she said. He kept going. The sirens came at 3:14 in the morning, and they came from 2 directions simultaneously, which was, Daniel would later learn, intentional. He heard them before he saw the lights, and the lights, when they came, were the specific red and blue of federal vehicles, rather than the single alternating flash of city police. They came up the street with precision, and without theater, no screeching, no dramatic stops, just vehicles positioning with the methodical competence of people who knew exactly where everyone was going to be and had planned accordingly. There were tip line calls and tagged messages, he would learn later. Hundreds of them. The field office had been monitoring the broadcast from early on. The names Elena had used were already in their system. Not Victor Hale's name in any official capacity, but adjacent names, adjacent incidents, a pattern that had been accumulating in a case file somewhere and had never had a sufficient catalyst. The catalyst was 8,000 people watching at 3 in the morning. 2 men were taken from vehicles at the end of the block. They said nothing. They looked, Daniel thought, like men who had done this kind of work before and understood that the time for silence was now. He and Elena stood at the front window. Noah slept through everything. In the morning gray winter light, frost on the inside of the storm door's lower pane, 2 federal agents arrived and took Elena's formal statement. They were professional and thorough, and asked questions she had clearly answered before, except that this time she answered them in a room with a federal recorder running and 2 people taking contemporaneous notes. One of them, a woman in her 40s with short gray hair at her temples, had looked at Elena at the end and said, quietly, "This took a lot of courage." Elena had nodded once and said nothing, which was, Daniel thought, probably the most accurate possible response. Victor Hale was taken into custody at his base residence at 9 a.m. He had, by that point, already called the lawyer. It didn't help. The snow came early again that November, the way it had the year before, thick and fast, turning the spruce tree into a white shape and the driveway into a surface that needed attention every morning. Noah had been admitted to the hospital twice over the summer, once in June for a severe episode triggered by a wildfire smoke advisory, once in August during a heat inversion that locked particulates close to the ground. Both times, Elena had been with him. Both times, the oximeter had climbed back to 97 before Daniel finished the drive to the hospital, because by the time he arrived, the crisis was already managed. By October, his pulmonologist adjusted the maintenance protocol. By November, the number of albuterol rescues per week had dropped by half. Elena had stopped wearing the long dresses sometime in September. Not in a single declared moment, there hadn't been an announcement. A speech, a morning where she'd stood in front of the mirror and decided it had simply happened incrementally, the way things change when the specific pressure that caused them stops pressing. Jeans. Then a skirt that ended at the knee. The prosthetic visible on stairs, on the school pickup sidewalk, in the grocery store. Noah had noticed and not made it strange. He'd asked once, in the direct and unceremonious way of an 8-year-old, "Does your leg hurt?" "Not anymore," she said. "Did it used to?" "For a long time?" "For a while." She looked at him. "Less now. Is it better now?" She looked at him. "Getting there." He nodded and went back to his book. Victor Hale had been indicted on 3 federal charges, including one charge of negligent homicide related to Lily's death that the federal prosecutors had built from the medical examiner's records and the pattern of insulin prescription fills. His lawyer was good. He was not good enough. The trial lasted 11 days. The jury deliberated for 9 hours, 32 years. Elena had not been in the courtroom for the verdict. She had been in Daniel's kitchen, drinking the bad coffee he always made when he forgot to measure properly, listening to the phone call from the federal victim's advocate on speaker. She had said, "Okay." Then she'd hung up and looked at the ceiling for about 15 seconds and then said, "Can we take Noah somewhere this weekend?" "Where do you want to go?" Daniel asked. "I don't know. Somewhere with trees." They went to Rocky Mountain National Park, all 3 of them, on a Saturday when the aspens were bare and the ground was iron hard with the first real frost, and Noah wore his inhaler on a clip on his jacket and ran ahead on the trail calling out the names of birds he recognized from his books. Steller's jay. Black-billed magpie. Listen, that's a raven, not a crow. The evening of the first major snowfall of the new season, Daniel stood in the kitchen and made the proper coffee for once, measured, timed, poured into the right cups, and when Elena came in from checking on Noah, he put 1 cup in front of her and sat down across the table and reached into his jacket pocket. He had been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, not from uncertainty about the question, but from wanting to find the right moment, which he now understood was a fool's errand. Because there were no right moments, There were only moments, and this one, his kitchen, her coffee, the snow coming down outside the window they had stood at together, while sirens crossed the street, seemed, to him, sufficient. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. He put the ring on the table. She looked at it. "I'm not asking because of everything that happened," he said. "I'm not asking out of obligation, or guilt, or whatever else. I'm asking because every morning when I hear you with Noah before I'm even downstairs, I think," he stopped, started again. "I think this is what a house is supposed to sound like." She was quiet for a long time. "Yes," she said. She wasn't looking at the ring. She was looking at him. The next morning, Noah came downstairs and found them both in the kitchen. Elena at the stove. Daniel behind her with his hands on the counter to either side of her, both of them watching the snow through the window. Noah sat at the table and poured his cereal with the focused attention of a person doing an important task. Then, "Is she my mom now?" Daniel turned. Elena turned. She came around the counter and crossed the kitchen and crouched down the metal prosthetic, making its faint, familiar contact with the tile until she was at his eye level, the way Daniel had learned from watching her with him in crisis. Down to his height, close enough, present. "I already am," she said. Noah absorbed this with the same considered seriousness he brought to bird identification and deep-sea bioluminescence. He reached out and patted her hand once, the way a much older person might, solemn and brief, and then went back to his cereal. Elena straightened up. She looked at Daniel. He looked at her. Outside, the snow kept coming down patient and relentless and entirely without memory, covering everything in the same clean white, making the street and the spruce tree and the driveway into new surfaces, unmarked, waiting to be walked on. The radiator ticked. The humidifier ran upstairs out of habit, even though Noah didn't need it on clear days anymore. The coffee was, for once, the right temperature. Daniel reached across the counter and turned on the kitchen light against the gray morning, and the room filled with warm yellow, and the three of them, the man who had learned to ask fewer questions and mean more by them, the woman who had learned that staying was sometimes the braver act, and the boy who was learning the names of everything, existed in it quietly together, while the snow did what snow does, which is cover and continue and come back again, season after season, indifferent to everything beneath it, and somehow, in its indifference, offering a kind of permission to begin.